Now we are going to get started with some of the tools that we use in Adobe Illustrator. Okay, the first two tools that I think are the most important that we know how to use are the direct selection tool, which is the white arrow. Its keyboard command or shortcut is the letter A, and the other one is the selection tool. It's the black arrow, and the keyboard command is V. And just like in Photoshop with the move tool, which also happens to use the letter V, the selection tool will do very similar things that the move tool did in Photoshop. Next important is the pen tool, and the pen tool does a few things that are a little bit different than it did in Photoshop. So let me back out of this real quick. So before we start with the pen tool, I want you to look at two really important settings when you're drawing in Adobe Illustrator. The first one is your fill and your stroke. You'll notice in Photoshop that was your foreground and background, but now all we have is a foreground color. And I'm going to give you guys a suggestion. When you're drawing with the pen tool, unless you're super experienced, turn your fill to nothing. Okay, you can leave a stroke color on and that's fine, but I would say always remove that fill color because it's just very complicated, especially if you are new to Illustrator. So I'm going to Control 0, so that gets me sit on screen with just the artboard I'm working with, and I'm going to start a new path. I know the path is going to be new because if you look at the little icon of the pen tool, it has a star under it or an asterisk, and so that means that it's going to be a new path. So as I click my anchor points, a simple click will give you just a straight line. And just like in Photoshop using the pen tool, if you click and drag, you're going to get a Bezier curve. And one of the things we always want to remember is that if we see handles up here on our anchor point, then the next time we click, we know that that next line is going to be a curve. Now right here on this anchor point that I'm looking at right now, I don't see any handles, so I know that the next click will be a straight line. And one of the things that's really super cool about Illustrator that all my students seem to like is that if you were in Adobe Photoshop and you wanted to break this handle off and go to a straight line, you would have to hold down the Alt or Option key to break that handlebar. But in Illustrator, they took away the necessity for the key, and so if you just click back on that anchor point, it will convert the anchor point to a different one. So now when I click, it's going to be a straight line instead of a curved line. So let's look at that one more time. So if I make a Bezier curve and I click on the path, my next line will be straight. Had I not clicked on it to make a new path, my line would have a curve to it. So those are some simple things that you need to know about creating shapes or creating paths with the anchor point and with the pen tool. Now to get out of this shape and start a new one, if I press enter, it will take me out of that path, and so now it gives me the ability to start making a new shape. Now if I'm going to close my shape up and I want it to be a form, I'll notice that my anchor point, or when I cross over the original anchor point, the pen has a little icon below it that looks like a closed 0 or a closed O. So that tells me that this is going to be a closed up shape. So now if I want to, I can click on this shape with my selection tool. And now if I want to go in and add a fill color to it, that would be the easiest way to do that. Now I want to go back and edit this path that I drew up here at the top. So I'm going to click on my path, and then I'm going to use my direct selection tool. And let's say that I wanted this anchor point to go down below the line instead of above the line. If I click on the anchor point, it activates that one. I know that that's the active anchor point because it's filled in with a solid color. I can actually drop that down, and I can make adjustments of handles. I can shift anchor points around. And you'll notice that when I adjust this path, the stroke that we had applied to it will follow that. So in Photoshop, sometimes you have to remove the stroke and then reapply it if you make adjustments. So that is super nice, and it's very helpful. Let's talk about shapes for a second. So if I click on, let me get this back to where we need it to be. If I click on shapes, and so I see the little triangle down here on the bottom corner, I know that there, if I see a triangle, that there's other shapes hidden in our drawer right here. The cool thing is in Illustrator, if I click on that little outside, let me do that one more time so you guys can see. If I click on, let's say, open my drawer, if I click on this little arrow that's here on the side, that allows me to tear away that drawer. So if I'm working with shapes a lot, or if I'm working with my pen a lot, which I tend to do, then I can move these drawers out here and get to them a little bit faster than going over here and finding them in my toolbar. Okay, so let's work on shapes real quick. So I'm going to make a rectangle, and you'll notice that as I was drawing it, I get little measurement markers on the side. Now, my particular shapes don't have any fill in them, so let's add some fill. It applied the fill right then to that smaller rectangle because it was already selected. Let's say that I don't want a stroke on that rectangle. I just want it to be a solid blue box or a solid blue square. I can remove the stroke, and then now it is stroke free. Okay, and so I've got rounded rectangle. If I use a rounded rectangle, as I draw it, I can choose the measurements or the size. Another fun thing is if I'm making a shape and I know I want it to be a specific size, all I have to do is click on the screen or anywhere in the artboard, and it will let me apply a size. And then when I press OK, here's my perfectly sized shape. Now let's say, for example, that I want to make my square, my rectangle here, a perfect square, and I want it to be 2.5 inches. Over here on my properties, I've got my width and my height, so I can go in here and let's see. I can go in here. I said I want it to be 2.5 inches, maybe. I don't remember what I said. It's okay. And so I'm going to do 2.5 here and 2.5 there. I could link them together if I wanted to. And so now I have a perfect square. So that is another cool feature that Illustrator has. Now let's go ahead and take off this stroke here and do some playing around. Okay, so the next shape, the polygon tool and the star tool work very, very similar. I like using the star tool just for demonstrations. As I start to draw the star, it's always going to default to a 5-point star. But if I'm drawing it and I am still holding down my mouse, I can use the up arrow or the down arrow to control the number of sides that I want for my shape. So I can turn a star into a triangle pretty easily. That also works with my polygon. So I use the up arrow to get more sides and the down arrow, and eventually I could get a triangle this way as well. So that's another fun thing that you can do with those two shapes. Now, we are going to talk about how we can use two shapes together. I'm going to put this one right here on top. So I have two shapes. I'm going to turn this one green so you guys can see. I have a red square and a green triangle. And I want to select both of these objects at the same time so I can work with them together. So I've got my selection tool highlighted, and so I'm going to draw a box around it. And you'll notice that both shapes are highlighted. And over here on the side, we have a really cool special tool that we use a lot called the Shape Builder tool. And so when I use the Shape Builder tool and I click on it, sometimes in class we jokingly call it the drunk snowman because it looks like a snowman that's fallen over. As I highlight my shapes that I have selected, those shapes will be visible with little dots on them to show you that that's what's being looked at right now. So I can go in and I can combine these two shapes. So let's see, I've got them both selected still. So let me show you a cool thing. I can combine them or I can subtract from them. So if I hold down my Alt key, which, hey, by the way, isn't Alt the same key in Photoshop for subtracting from a selection? If I hold down Alt and I click on that triangle, what it's going to do is that triangle no longer exists, and now there is a void inside that shape. If I wanted to create a really cute little snowman, let's come back up here and get my ellipse tool. And I'm going to make another circle just like this. So now I've got two circles that are there. If I select them both and then I go to my shape builder tool, if I draw a line between these two shapes, it's actually seeing it as three shapes because it sees the little part in the middle as a shape as well. I can make that now a cool snowman.